6 cheap cars that look expensive. Most regular people are clueless when it comes to cars that look expensive versus cars that actually are expensive. That means you and I can easily get away with looking like we earn big money just from the car we're driving, when in reality it's a cheap car almost anyone could buy. A lot of the cars on this list were way out of reach for the average person when they were new, but now just a few years later, thanks to depreciation, they're actually attainable. So here are 6 cheap cars that look expensive. Now before we get into the list, subscribe to the channel if you like our videos. First on this list is the Porsche Cayenne. First released back in 2002, before some of you were even born. It's now one of the cheapest ways to get in the driving seat of a car with a Porsche logo up front. The average person that doesn't know much about cars has no idea that you could have picked it up for very cheap, maybe about 10% of its original price when it was new. It's a luxury SUV that has big road presence and solid German build quality. Now the one to go for is the second generation, the Mark II, which ran from 2010 to 2017. Now even though the design is almost 14 years old, it still looks fresh and modern. And for under £10,000, you can just about get yourself a 2010 to 2012 model with a 3-litre diesel V6 engine, one with about 150,000 miles on it. Now that mileage isn't too much of an issue as long as it's been maintained well over the years. But if you want one that's not a diesel and you want one with a bit more exhaust noise and power, you can go for the Porsche Cayenne S, which has the big 4.8 litre V8, which starts at around £15,000. Obviously you'll be spending a lot more money on fuel, but you get a Porsche SUV with 400 horsepower and a sweet exhaust note. Next up is the Mercedes CL. The CL is the precursor to the Mercedes S-Class Coupe, so you can imagine it's a big boy. The third and final generation that ran from 2006 to 2013 is the one to go for. The older models look cool too, but they have aged quite a bit. The Mark III comes in at a huge 5.1 meters long, and it was the brand's largest luxury 2-door coupe model. Now being an impractical 2-door huge car that wasn't offered with any small frugal diesel engines, they're rarer than hen's teeth, so you won't see many of these around on the roads. They're subtle enough to blend in, but they still look classy and expensive. And inside you'll find everything that you touch is either leather or metal or maybe wood. And compared to modern standards, the interior is quite dated, but that's okay, the outside makes up for it. This car wasn't really made with frugality in mind at all. It has super smooth air suspension, pillarless doors, and massive engines starting at 4.7 litres, going all the way up to a 6-litre twin-turbo V12 in the super rare CL65. For £10,000 you can get yourself a CL500 with about 80,000 miles on, but if you want something again with a bit more power, a bit more noise and sportier looks, you can go for a CL63, which is a full-fat AMG, and that will set you back about £13,000 for a decent example, or £16,000 plus for a facelifted one. Next on the list, we can't talk about luxury cars and not talk about the S-Class. The size and understated styling of S-Classes make every single generation look expensive. They all come with top-of-the-line technology from their time period, and if you get one with one of the smaller diesel engines, they don't cost that much to run either. For under £10,000 you can get yourself a 2009 to 2012 one that has been maintained quite well. There'll be plenty to choose from, so you have a bunch of options between petrol, diesel and different specs. If you can stretch to £15,000, then you can get yourself a W222 S-Class, which is the one that was sold from 2013 to 2020. Now to me personally, it's so much more modern inside and out that it's worth the extra 5k. I think it looks the absolute business and will stay looking expensive and modern for much longer than the previous generation. Whichever one you go for, the S350 diesel gets about 45 mpg, and if you go for one of the newer generation ones, it's even ULEZ and Clean Air Zone compliant if that's something you need to think about. Next up on the list, it's hard to believe you can actually pick up one of these for under £10,000, but it's true. It's the Bentley Continental Flying Spur. They're not quite as good looking as the Continental Coupe, which was named the GT, so they are a few grand cheaper, but the styling of the Flying Spur hasn't really changed that much over the last 20 years, so even the earlier models still look mega expensive, and obviously you've got the Bentley badge up front, which helps that. The 2006 model is what your £10,000 will get you. They all come with a 6-litre W12 engine with 552 horsepower and all-wheel drive to put all that power down with ease. Being that it's got so much power, it should be quite a lot of fun to drive. Maybe I'll make a video with one of these one day. It's a big old barge with a big engine, so it will be wanting a fuel top up very often, and obviously it's a Bentley, so the maintenance costs can be very high. Up next, it's the car favoured by dictators all over the world and made famous by the Transporter movies, for me anyway. It's the Audi A8. Not the generation Frank Martin drove in the Transporter, it's actually the generation after that, produced from 2013 onwards. It looks so much more modern than the previous generation, and for £10,000 you can get behind the wheel of one with a 3 litre diesel V6 that has mileage slightly on the higher side, but as long as it's been maintained, again, it shouldn't really be a problem. Being the top of the line Audi that it is, tech-wise it's filled with all the toys like heated massaging seats, adaptive cruise control, head-up display, soft closed doors and a whole bunch of other things. Next up, I made a bunch of videos about Range Rovers and Range Rover Sports, and they are one of my favourite cars, so it's only right that I add one of these to the list. Now the one that I'm adding to this list is the L320 Range Rover Sport. It fits nicely in the £10,000 budget. These ran from 2005 up to 2012 with a couple of facelifts and had a bunch of different engine options from a 2.7 litre diesel all the way up to a 5 litre petrol engine. Now for £10,000 you'll have your pick of the bunch, so it's whatever suits you. Personally, I suggest you go for the 5 litre petrol in stock form, so one that hasn't had a dodgy body kit or it hasn't had massive over the top wheels and super dark tinted windows. In stock form, this car looks seriously upscale, and when you floor it, the noise that it makes will back up the looks. This car isn't all show and no go either. The engine actually puts out over 500 horsepower, so this tank accelerates from 0 to 60 in 6.1 seconds, which is quite fast if you consider its weight. Now if your budget can stretch to £15,000, you can bag yourself a newer shape L494 Range Rover Sport. Again, as a diesel or a petrol, they've dropped massively in price, so you can potentially pick one up for about £11,000 or £12,000 if you don't mind the high miles or it being a category car that's been repaired. But again, personally, if you're stuck at £10,000, go for the L320 5 litre petrol. Like the video if you liked the video, and subscribe for more car content.